welcome everybody. If this is your first time to an RfRx meeting, it's really great to have you along. We'll chat a little bit more about the program and the way things work in a moment, but yeah, make yourself feel at home. The RfRx chats are just designed to cover some really interesting topics in a helpful, in a conversational manner. So yeah, please feel welcome just to hang out. If you have any comments, if you have any thoughts you want to drop in the chat, please feel free to do so.
Yeah. Folks, exactly what Sasha said. Welcome so much. My name is Eric Wells. I'm the support group director for Recovering from Religion. And Sasha D'Souza is here with me as a recurring guest, and I'm very excited to have him here. And he is the regional director for the support group program in the
Australia.
In Australia area, the Australia and surrounding areas. I don't want to piss off the New Zealanders or anything, or the Kiwis or anything like that, but I know how to spell it. I just don't know how to say it very well, apparently. But anyways, just like every RfRx, we have a poll at the very beginning that will kind of get you in the mindset of what we're going to be talking about tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll, and this poll is anonymous, so feel free to answer truthfully, because we're not going to be able to see how you answer at all. The first question is, when you were religious, did you feel your identity was intrinsically locked into that religion? Yes, no, I'm not sure, or I'm still religious. Question number 2, how important was looking at your religious shortcomings / failings, like sin, how important was that to you when you were a part of the religion? Very important, slightly important, I was kind of neutral about it, not very important, it didn't matter at all, or I'm still religious. And the third question is, do you still feel limited by or judging yourself through the ethical framework of your religious background? Oftentimes, sometimes, not at all, or I'm still religious. So we're going to go ahead and have that poll running while we just do this whole opening part, and then wrap it up once we begin to introduce the guest today, the fantastic guest. I'm so excited that he's here. But while we do that, let's talk about why we're even here. What the heck is RfRx? So here on RfRx, we meet every Monday night here in the US and around the world. And we bring on guests and topics to discuss that may be relevant to the folks who are coming to Recovering from Religion. This isn't a replacement for the online community or the support groups, which we'll talk about later, but instead, this is really complementary to those communities. The guests here that we have on will provide some good advice and some good coping skills. And if you have any questions or inquiries or comments that you want to send us, you can send it to rfrx@recoveringfromreligion.org. And we have actually finally caught up with all of the videos, and they're all on YouTube now. So with that being said, Sasha, why don't you tell us about what Recovering from Religion is?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, if this is your first time, welcome. So Recovering from Religion, well, we tend to have a mission statement, if you like, or a way that describes what we focus upon. And I guess we could sum it up in 3 ways. There's hope, healing, and support to people who reach out to us here at Recovering from Religion. And people reach out from all over the world, from all sorts of backgrounds, all sorts of circumstances, and they appreciate that the focus of RfR is not to deconvert people, it's not to make somebody a non-believer as such, it's just to provide hope, healing, and support, and to meet people where they are in their journey, either questioning faith or having doubts about things. So how would we sum it up? Well, I guess if we look at the healing aspect, first of all, Recovering from Religion is really focused upon providing a safe environment where people can chat about what they're going through. So we have a helpline that's available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We have agents all over the world who are really well trained to listen in an empathetic and supportive way, not to provide answers as such, but just to hear people as they explain what they're going through. There's no judgment, there's no criticism, there's no preaching or proselytizing. We're just here to provide that support. And I know a lot of the agents personally, they do a beautiful job. They're really genuinely there for people. So yeah, the helpline is available. There's also a resource page that the helpline agents have. So it doesn't really matter what the topic is that's raised. There is some fantastic resources, often designed by qualified people, where the support can be given to people, whether it's dealing with family members who have a different religious view, whether it's coming to terms with our sexuality, whether it's coming to terms with a feeling of self-esteem having left religion. All of those things are available in the resources tab. And if you want to make use of that, have a look at the website, recoveringfromreligion.org /resources. Under that section, you'll see the variety of topics that we cover. And we mentioned the second one was hope. Hope is another category. Sometimes the word hope has a slightly religious feel to it. We might think that, the hope for the future or something. Well, no, in this sense, we mean hope in a practical way, not hope in some sort of theoretical way. And the hope aspect that Recovering from Religion focuses upon is just sharing and listening to one another, listening to our personal stories, being there to provide suggestions, guidance, direction, whatever is needed. We use this expression through 2020. We said, we're all in this together. Well, when it comes to questioning religion or questioning where we stand in the world as regards faith and belief, we are genuinely all in this together. And so the hope aspect is really designed to help people see that you don't have to do it alone. We're here to support one another. And on that point, we've got, as Eric mentioned, a whole complement of material that's available. The RfRx talks that are on our YouTube channel. We also have a blog and a podcast. So have a look through at the links off the main page and you'll find your way to that. So that's hope and healing. And then there's the support aspect. Eric, you might be the best one to sum up that.
I am so thankful that you let me talk about this. You guys all know this is my favorite part about it, about RfR. But I think you may not know that Sasha is actually a big part of the support group program too. But the part of the support is that we kind of developed and RfR was really kind of built around was face-to-face in-person meetings. This is, to me, where the long-term healing can come from, where we it's almost like going to a doctor's office, like what do I need to work on between now and the next meeting? I've got this little bit of an ache. What do you think could be done about it or something? It's not an emergency type of thing necessarily. That would be what the helpline would be for, but this is where, and the support groups, we get to do the long-term healing. We have well over 60 groups around the world, one of which and hopefully two of which are in Australia that Sasha is doing a fantastic job with. These are in-person meetings. We're starting to open up, as you can tell, as we're getting more and more people vaccinated. And so we're able to do them both in person and virtually. So you can find one of the nearest ones to you, or there's even a virtual one if there's nothing near you at meetup.com/recoveringfromreligion. So we talked about the helpline, and then we also talked about the support groups. Those are both peer support. Nobody is really trained in those two programs professionally. So it's not like they can give advice, they can diagnose stuff. They're mostly there for an empathetic ear, or direct you towards resource, or just be there to support. Oftentimes, we may need more than what peer support can offer. And so we have set up the Secular Therapy Project to connect folks with professional support, with mental health professionals. And the folks who apply to be a part of this, the Secular Therapy Project, are heavily vetted to ensure that they're appropriately licensed in their state or their country, to make sure that they maintain a secular practice. So you won't run the risk of being proselytized to, like, go home and pray harder, or go home and think on this Bible verse. In addition to that, they're also vetted to ensure that they run an evidence-based treatment. So you can sign up for an account and hopefully find a secular therapist near you at seculartherapy.org. So we had those programs that we talked about, and then there was another need that kind of popped up, where folks were wanting to kind of meet one another, or actually have a conversation with one another whenever they could. And so we kind of set an online community up, the Recovering from Religion online community. This is in Slack, and it's not at all publicly available. You have to kind of be screened through the helpline to be a part of it. But there are a ton of different channels in the RfR online community. If you're a military or ex-military and you're kind of struggling with stuff, there's a lot of other folks in this military channel that you can talk to. LGBTQ channel, a secular parenting channel, some religion-specific channel like Islam or ex-Jehovah's Witness. There's a ton of different channels that you can participate in and meet and discuss things with like-minded folks who have gone through similar situations. So if that's something you kind of want to check out, head over to the helpline, either call in or chat in to them, and they'll have a conversation with you about it. Some of us may be pretty far away from religion and are looking to have a community as well, and more than just what the RfR online community is. And if you are that person, I would recommend checking out the Atheist Community of Discord. They're a fantastic group of people, really well moderated, and a lot of fun to get to know. They are right now streaming this show into their Discord channel, and so you're able to watch that there too, unless you like going to Zoom. But check out the Atheist Community of Discord. I'll drop an invite link into the chat. Sasha, what's next?
Well, yeah, that's a huge amount of material there and great resources. But if you want to be part of it, if you would like to make yourself available, please feel free to volunteer. Recovering from Religion is always looking for like-minded, qualified, enthusiastic people who just want to be there to support our fellow person. So if you are feel impelled to do that, please go to the website, have a look at recoveringfromreligion.org, go to the volunteer tab. There's so many different ways that you can volunteer your time, whether it's to assist with a support group, maybe be a helpline phone agent. Maybe if you're a qualified therapist, to go to the Secular Therapy Project, make yourself available. There's so many different ways that you can assist people, because I guess for a lot of us, we remember what it was like when we went through, these steps of perhaps questioning religion or questioning our background and our faith. Sometimes it was hard to do it alone. Well, Recovering from Religion is determined to make sure that people are not alone. So if you feel impelled to be there to help others, please feel free to jump in. We'd love to have you a part of the team.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sasha. So just like every week, I kind of go over the what to expect out of this this show here. So for the first hour, we're going to have a discussion with our fantastic, fabulous, amazing guest. And during that discussion, you're probably going to have some questions. And if you do, please type them into the chat, send them to Sasha or I privately. And that goes for you too, Atheist Community Discord. We're monitoring that as well. And we will collect those questions. And during the second part of the discussion, it will be a Q&A session. We'll present those questions to our guests for their response. The discussion will last about an hour. The Q&A session will last about 15 or 20 minutes. And then after that, we're going to bring on our fabulous and brilliant Executive Director of Recovering from Religion, Gayle Jordan, and she's going to give us some closing thoughts on what's been on her mind. Once that's all done, we're going to shut off the recording and then open up the lines, and it's going to be hangout time. Our guests may be able to stick around a little bit for some follow-up questions or just for you to express what you want to express. But this hangout time has been really fantastic, where a lot of people get to know one another and share their stories. And it's almost been like a little impromptu support group in some sense too. So we've been talking quite a lot. Sasha, why don't we just get on with it and bring on our guests? Why don't you tell us who we're talking to today?
Sure. Well, David, we'd really love to welcome you along here today. Thanks for making yourself available.
Thank you. Welcome. Happy to be here.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, I might just share a couple of things for those who are watching and listening about you, if that's all right. Bit of a bio, and then correct me where I'm wrong and jump in and fill in the blanks. So as we know, David is a licensed mental health. What's the C stand for?
Counselor.
Counselor. Thank you. An educator, a trainer for other health providers and professionals. And David has an amazing body of work available. If you have a look at his website, which is lifeweavings.org.com.
Both will get you to the same place.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, please have a look at David's bio there. I just want to share a couple of things that David wrote, and then I think this really sets the scene. Growing up, questions played a big role for David, and he wanted to know how things work, why people did what they did. So of course, psychology is what he ended up studying. And it wasn't, for 2 decades, I believe, David, you were religious fundamentalism was kind of the definition of your life. Would that be right?
That would be very accurate, yeah.
So that really helps us, creates an environment where we look at things through a very narrow lens. So I really admire the fact that you were able to break out of that and then use your experience as a springboard to help other people. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and what brings you to this situation today to help others?
Sure. So, yeah, like I mentioned, I mean, in the first couple of decades, I'm a Bible college graduate. So I was originally going to be a minister and, building the kingdom. And about halfway through, I just finally had one too many questions without sufficient answers and had to leave it all behind. But at the time, there was some, transfer stuff, but there was also just an issue around, I didn't want to leave the program I was a part of. Frankly, at the time, probably a little out of spite, because I didn't want to ever encounter the issue of like, well, if you'd stayed in, your questions would have been answered. So instead, I completed the program, ended up kind of almost double majoring in theology and psychology, and came out the other end of it with even more questions. While at the same time with a greater appreciation for just the power of religion, the power of faith, why it works, and why it's so enticing. Even now, as a non-believer, I often don't use the term atheist because whatever. But even as a non-supernaturalist believer, I still appreciate why there's still moments in which it's like, oh, that would be really nice to go back to, and unfortunately not. But yeah, no, I went on. I've got a master's in forensic psychology and another master's in counseling psychology, and I am currently working on my doctorate in clinical psych. So I hope to have that finished here within the next 2 years.
So that kind of goes in, you touched a little bit on fundamentalism, and it kind of is going to lead us into what we're really going to talk about tonight, abuse within religious fundamentalism. So David, where would we kind of start? Like, what kind of understanding would we need to have to really begin this conversation?
No, absolutely. So this is not going to be a kind of litany of the abuses of various religious institutions. Not that wouldn't be interesting, but it would be hella depressing, and there's plenty of information out there for that. What I'm concerned with here is looking at why people get drawn into a structure that fundamentally undermines their sense of self-efficacy and ability to question, and then what are the processes that occur and that, one, often keep you trapped, and then two, stick with you later on. I mean, it's one of that third question in the poll about how often do you still feel yourself judged by the previous ethical standard that is like bullshit. Like, like, no, I don't agree with this anymore. And you're still finding yourself, to varying degrees of shaming, to staying up awake at night, pondering, oh my God, I might be going to hell. It's been a while since I've personally had that but it still happens, and it's more than 20 years ago.
Yeah, and it's so
Yeah,
insidious. It really, for me, it's worked its way deep into my psychology, and that
yeah,
is having these conversations is incredibly helpful. But it's also one of the main reasons why I enjoy the support group so much. Is month after month, if something like this comes up, I have a place I can go to and have that discussion.
definitely. And that's where, and so, and part of this then is helping see. So I use dogmatism or fundamentalism in a psychological sense of a process, a tendency that frankly we all have to varying degrees. And I'm going to go through, how I define some of that, how that works. But it's, so each time I go through a point, I'm actually going to show a bit of where the religious side tends to take a look at this, and then on the other, a bit more of how more of the secular or political ideologies can sometimes exhibit much of the
Mm.
same type of indoctrination practices, self-doubt, and so on, that keep you from questioning things, that keep you, limited, so that you feel like, well, if I leave this, all my sense of meaning and purpose is going to be lost. So I need to stay here.
And this is more like my hearing of you saying this is I'm kind of relating it to like the political stuff we went through just recently. But this is actually more than just US centric. This is kind of
Oh
almost
yeah,
really inherent and built into religion itself, no matter where it is in the world. And I think that Sasha, who's in Australia, could kind of has seen similar things happening in his own country too.
Yeah, that's the reality. It doesn't matter what the controlling body is, whether it's religious, self-help groups, whether it's political. They're all basically govern us under this fear, obligation, and guilt banner, and that has such a damaging effect. So I'm really looking forward to your discussion on how we can sort of break out of that, how we can look through that bubble and that feeling of being entrapped by that way of thinking.
Definitely. And that's, it's, I know Eric or Sasha, one of you had mentioned the, the secular therapists, program, which I'm a part of and absolutely love. And part of that is, a lot of my clients, many of them have come out of and are working through the ripple effects of religious indoctrination, and at the same time, increasingly finding people who are facing political indoctrination. The of families and so on, and people that otherwise used to be friends, cutting them off and judging them in ways that make no sense, because they have taken on much of the structure of what otherwise we would classify as religion, but isn't, because it isn't government sanctioned. But you've got this whole process here, and it's like, well, wait, why am I feeling a similar sense of what I was like when I was under these religious things, and all of a sudden I'm seeing some of this happening again? It's like, what's going on? Well, the reason for it is because there's a similar process. There's a similar bedrock set of behaviors, of principles, of framings about morality and who you are and how we relate to one another, that they're all operating under.
Yeah, David, would it be true that many people who come out of a religious environment where they're given the answer to life, the universe, the future, everything, can sometimes be more vulnerable to perhaps another group, say a political ideology that also provides the solution, the answer, the focus for the future? Is that why sometimes as humans we kind of go from one bubble into another bubble, because we're still looking for the answers to the big questions in life?
Absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't say that there is a, at least my current level of, research knowledge about this, but I wouldn't say that there is an inevitability, but I think a lot of it has to do with how one leaves your
Mhm.
background. If you're leaving um, for I was hurt and therefore I'm out of here kind of thing. Not that that's an illegitimate reason, but there's less of an ownership of the process going on. It's a knee-jerk response where you haven't truly wrestled with, wait a minute, this wasn't just something that I belong to. This was a set of defining principles
Mhm.
through which I understood who I am, my place in the universe, and how I relate to one another, which is a far bigger thing than just going to a building on Sundays or Wednesdays, or for those of us who went 3 or 4 times a week. it's
Mm.
it's more than just a place that you go. It really is fundamental to how you consider yourself.
Your
And that
identity.
just,
Mm.
yeah, exactly. It is an identity paradigm, and not that it's an identity paradigms are inherently wrong, but if we don't wrestle with them, if we don't identify, wait a minute, how is this working, then and then of course see those underlying processes, we're going to get caught up. I mean, there's any number of people out there who we've heard either one, oh yeah, I'm an atheist, and then 2 years later, they're preaching on TV. Or, and you go, what's the hottest selling thing is to be able to write a book on once I was an atheist and then I saw God again. It's like, well, were you, how, how deep was this deconversion process? And not really getting into mind reading, but there is that question that comes up of how much a part of, how deep did you really go into this?
Mm.
And especially when you then ask them, well, why? And it's like, well, I was hiking and I saw a stream split into three and realized the Trinity was, not correct. Real story.
You make
Yeah.
there's a good point there, David. So separating the emotional reasons for leaving or identity from the logical academic reasons for questioning our belief structure, is that a fundamental thing to try and help people take it to the logical aspect?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and sometimes it's logic. Some of it's just an appreciation for our brains. Our brains are inherently lazy, in the sense that they will always go towards the path of least resistance. And because it developed evolutionarily. So if it can provide, if it was set up in a way that I can go this path and use the fewest resources possible, but encourage my longevity and ability then to continue on, then it's going to go there. The brain doesn't care about truth. It doesn't not, certainly not in a capital T. It doesn't care about even what's good for you. It cares about what works. And so, and so understanding some of the processes behind all of this can be helpful in then recognizing, wait a minute, it's not that I'm a failure. It's not that I missed the supposed obviousness of the problems in this ideology that I adhere to. It's, well, it enticed a core part of how my brain
Mhm.
works in wanting order, in wanting simplicity, in wanting a readily made structure for guiding my basically resource management. How am I going to direct my life? Well, here you go. And the brain's going, yay, I don't have to think about this anymore. And it's great.
Let's talk.
Challenging things is hard.
Let's talk a little bit about the nature of like fundamentalism. What kind of makes that different than really anything else?
So actually, I talked about this a little bit in a particular blog entry that I wrote a while ago. So I shared the link to it in the chat. But so fundamentalism in both a religious sense and a secular political sense, has really kind of three principles that I'm going to go through. There might be more. Part of it's just time. So here we are. But is that it's going to elevate, in the religious side, it's going to elevate self-doubt above that of community dialogue. So functionally, what that means is that it's going to start with the premise that everything you see is and feel and think is at some level flawed, problematic, or to be doubted in a malignant way, not in the skeptical way of just like, oh well, what do I know? What do I not know? What are all the questions that I haven't answered, asked yet? Instead, it's even the questioning itself is also flawed.
Right.
And by doing so, it discourages dialogue. So, there's that insecurity that comes up out of, well, deity in whatever form that it takes, whatever religious path you have, is so fundamentally different than you that you can't even, that's why faith comes in, is that it's so fundamentally different than who you and what you are that you will never grasp it. And yet, to grasp it is to grasp the most important thing that ever you'll encounter in your entire life.
I mean, like, we've had 6,000 years on this planet to try and figure it out, and we haven't done it yet, right? It seems like this is hijacking the curiosity. It's killing curiosity, and having when you have to doubt your own feelings and your own thoughts, then the only thing left seems to be relying on something external, relying on what you're being told and taking it in hook, line, and sinker.
Yep. And of course, and part of that, doubt is to diminish the role. Somebody had mentioned that, one of the reasons why religion is still so enticing, and probably will be for the entire future of humanity until, the heat death or frozen death of the universe, depending on what theory you ascribe to, is a sense of community. Well, but it's community within a elect group. It's community not based on a general humanity. It's because that humanity is something you have to constantly question. It's that malignant skepticism again. And so then it cuts you off from the ability to discuss any of these things with anybody else. How often did any of us really encounter you did a really good job of proselytizing or preaching the gospel to them of whatever form that may be, and they didn't grasp it, not because what you said was wrong or incomplete, but because there was something fundamentally flawed or wrong in them.
It's the sheep and the goats analogy. They were flawed. They weren't worthy of the message we were sharing.
Yep. Yeah. There is something fundamentally other that they belong to, which is itself also then bizarre, because here you are seeing this person who you otherwise are completely bonded with and really wanting to share the most important message you've ever encountered, and they don't get it, supposedly. And what are you then left with? Well, either one, I'm going to question how I presented it, or maybe there's a part of what I said that was a problem, or I can just simply go, well, it was on them.
Right.
Well, what's going to be easier?
So that inherent judgment comes in again. I'm right, they're wrong. And what an unhealthy worldview that creates for those of us within that echo chamber bubble.
Yep. Which is then that second part of this process then is a special emphasis on knowledge and ethics. So it's it's not just how you know something, it's how you then conduct your life. And so, and because then it piggybacks off of that just strong difference between you and deity, then even knowledge and ethics, then becomes so functionally different. I mean, how many times, remember, the Abraham story, for instance, in Isaac, and he's about to sacrifice his son, and there's a whole theological debate as to whether or not it was a real request. And the struggle there, though, is based on the fact that it's a bone deep recognition that if we were to ever ask parents to slaughter their child, we would be the most heinous act on the planet. Like, how awful can you be? And so as a consequence, we look at this request and go, there is no way that the God that I would want to worship would ever ask somebody to do that in any legitimate way. But then you're now struck with, well, then was God lying to him? Was it deliberately deceptive? Well, now I can't, that doesn't work either. And so you then, get thrown into, well, I guess it's a mystery, and I'm just going to have to do what? Fundamentally come back to doubting there's something wrong with me that I don't get. What should be clear. And of course, you go and encounter anybody else, and they're all going, well, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's either one, you'll encounter somebody who reinforces it, or two, you'll encounter somebody who goes, no, that's just bad shit. Why would we ever want to have that, ask anybody about that? Which then just goes, yeah, but if I start this question, then it's a slippery slope.
David, that reminds me of a lot of the fundamental Christian or religious leaders will often try and combat these doubts that the followers have. And a well-known expression by the leaders of the Mormon Church, one of the quorum, or I can't remember who it was, he said, we have to learn to doubt your doubts before you doubt your faith. So when it comes to those biblical narratives that just don't seem to make sense, the problem is you, because you have doubts about it. Doubt your doubts before you doubt your faith. And if you have these doubts, put them up on the shelf and just forget about them, and it'll all be revealed in time. But how unhealthy is that for our naturally curious mind?
Exactly. Well, and this leads right into how it shows up in secular political groups, because you start, essentially it's stating it's party unity or group unity in the face of personal questions.
Tribalism.
Exactly. And which is a inherent quality of human psychology. Anybody who's saying we need to get rid of tribalism, yeah, good luck. It's not going to happen. The only thing, it's like getting rid of proximity bias or any other cognitive heuristic. You're not going to get rid of it. The best we can do is increasingly become aware of their influences, so that we can actively engage from a place of mutual compassion in seeing then how these things work. So, it's easy to go, well, you're just being tribal, and then lose sight of the fact that, yeah, well, so am I in some other quality. And that's just not helpful. We're not seeing the humanity behind it, because in many ways, being tribal at its core is enormously helpful. If we had to sit around and figure out literally every single piece of information we have on our own, we'd be SOL. I mean, it would not go well. So we accept authority. We accept, group knowledge. We go through these things to varying degrees because we have to. And it's only when we bump up against, a personally felt overwhelming sense of something is not working anymore, that we then go, oh, wait, how long have I been accepting this? I didn't realize. But that takes work. I mean, that's hard. And I don't mean to be, it's not flippant. It's hard to work through that. It takes a lot of resources to challenge. And so it's a little wonder then that not a whole lot of people do it to a large degree. Most of us will do it in little things, but to make a life out of it, to change core, ideological structures, that's I mean, for that matter, it can be damaging as well. So there's that.
So there seems to be this also this other part of fundamentalism where there's a lot of predictions or prophecies that it makes, some have passed and never happened, but it always seems to be like this moving target that keeps getting pushed out further and further into the future. Is that a part of fundamentalism at all? That
huge, and that's where anytime to wrap up the the knowledge question, which goes right into this future begging almost, is
future begging
is like this idea of dialogue. There's a place at which knowledge is placed beyond that of dialogue, and where that you encounter that is different. Like that line is set different depending on the religious group that they're a part of or political group they're a part of. But either way, it's set where, well, religiously, then, in order to get past this point, the Kierkegaardian leap of faith thing, where you have to have a divine source to really understand this. Or in secular or political groups, it's, well, if you were part of this particular group, you would get it. It's almost the same languaging, where it's like, if you only had this, it's in a very common way, people often will say it like, well, if you have an opinion about parenting practices for something, and I'm going to probably step into it here for a second, but I mean, if you have an opinion on parenting practices, and then the person comes back and goes, yeah, well, I mean, are you a parent?
Right.
I mean, you don't really know if you're not a parent. No, I'm pretty certain, like, there is a level at which I may not know, there's an experiential level here, but I'm pretty certain I can still come up with some good points. It's like, I've never tried crack cocaine, but I'm pretty certain
it would be fun.
That it's not all that healthy for you.
Oh, okay.
Well, I mean, yeah. So it's almost this sacralization of personal experience that, without really understanding then that personal experience is even more prone to all of the biases and heuristic problems that we encounter, and which then, of course, keeps us trapped even further in it.
There's a level of condescension there too, really, isn't there? It's like, well, what would you know?
Well, and it's condescending not only to the people who are seeking to get, the answers, it's condescending even to the people within the in-group. I mean, they're literally telling people, look, it's okay for you not to have a different opinion. It's okay that you didn't question this, because really, why? Because of what you went through, or because of what identity you belong to. I mean, this is what you would think, right? I mean, well, why should we question it? You're overwhelmed by the fact that you belong to a certain race or sex or whatever. It's the old misogyny of, well, I mean, you're a woman, right? So you have to be thinking a certain way, as if being having certain biological parts encourages only one way of thinking. It's this essentializing of knowledge to characteristics that have zero role to play in how you develop the way that you think about life and your own moral worth and so on. And religion does it in certain ways, and then politics, or other groups will do it in others.
So where would we go to next from this? We've kind of set the basis of the nature of fundamentalism. What would be the next? Where would we go to next?
So part of that is just kind of going through some resolutions and like, okay, well, we're seeing how this works. How do we address it? What can we do about? And part of this is to recognize in that final point here of going, there is something to be said about the present moment, and I mean this more than the the new fad of mindfulness and so on. As much as I'm a big fan of it, there is a fad element to it, so just kind of calling that out. But there is a moment in which being able to say that, as I'm increasingly noting, that the future is constantly collapsing into the present. So what future we build is not something out here. It's something that we are presently doing with every single thing that we do, and what direction we seek, what level of intent that we are engaging with. And so, which then of course goes into why forgiveness within religious circles is set in an afterlife. Because then it's something that you'll never reach, so that the life you're living now is a constant struggle of dealing with something that you'll never solve in any absolute sense. Or from a secular perspective, you'll have this almost one drop rule, which has a insanely racist history in that, in that idea, but it's applied in other ideologies. It's similar to this, like purity testing. Well, I'm sorry, you didn't say the right word, you didn't say the right phrase, or you have a slightly different opinion about this one topic. Therefore, you're off the group island here. You're no longer, a conservative. You're no longer a liberal. You're no longer this. We've removed you because you didn't toe the line on every single jot and tittle. And so there's a removal there of people from their natural context, in which the struggle is not figuring out how to solve things 1,000 years in the future. It's, how do I deal with the limited knowledge that I have available to me right now? How can I address the uncertainty I have about my ethics from a place of a humanistic appreciation, rather than a dogmatic, shame-filled doubting of just my own self. And to do that is to encourage a community building, not in the sense of in-group, out-group, but to acknowledge that those are our tendencies, and then to actively seek out the commonalities so that we can build this dialogue, understand an increasing number of perspectives, and so that we keep weaving this larger and larger canvas to understand the experience of which all of us are only seeing a part of it. And so, but to undermine that is one part of how certain power structures, are attempting to do. And the very process itself takes a long time, because we're all operating under then a sense of moral injury, which is really this idea that, so my sense of meaning and purpose and ethics was tied to this structure, in an institution, like for instance, military, which is actually where moral injury originally came out of, where it's like, at some level, I have a problem with what I'm about to do, engage in, for instance, killing and then within war. But I'm going to deal with it by placing myself under the ethical guidelines or purpose of the nation state or the military structure and so on, command structure. And so it's okay until such time as you start then doubting, wait a minute, this might be a problem. There's something fundamentally wrong with what I'm being asked to do. Well, if I start doubting that, well, then I start doubting the structure itself, the institution. And so what results is a bone deep harm about how do I then move forward at all. If I can't trust the institutions themselves, what's left to me? What am I able to do? How can I move forward with this? It's why, others have mentioned before about how they still feel judged or feel, traumatized by certain doctrines, is because there's still that, there's still that almost perceived flaw that is continuing that we can't get rid of because we put our faith in something that ended up letting us down.
Yeah, it seems like that that system is just ready for someone to take advantage and abuse folks within it. If you have trust in a organization or an individual, and you set aside your critical thinking skills and your own self-doubt, it sounds just like a brilliant setup for abuse and taking advantage of people.
Oh, absolutely. And that's where, you get into these, paths of, somebody's noting, predators flock to these kind of power structures or, blaming the victim. And what ends up happening there is that it's, we all make mistakes. We're gonna say the wrong thing in the wrong moment. We're gonna fart in a theater. It's gonna be something where, we feel bad or a sense of shame or doubt about it. And instead of recognizing it as this piece within this long journey of life, instead that's a sign of something inherently wrong that you must then carry forward. And sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry, I love that point, David, because we're talking about the moral injury that comes when somebody recognizes they're under the control or the banner of a dangerous or a toxic sort of mindset or system. I heard an amazing quote that was absolutely empowering for me and countless other people when it comes to that. It's along the lines of, when an honest person realizes they were wrong, they will either cease being wrong or cease being honest. Words to that effect. I can't remember this. It's put a lot more eloquently by whoever quoted it. But yeah, so the choice comes in that moment. As you said, perhaps somebody facing a situation of having to follow orders in a military situation, perhaps somebody following the direction of their governing organization of their religious body. They come to a moment in time where they say, I either relinquish my own moral autonomy or I just go along with what I'm being told to do. You either cease being honest or you cease being wrong.
Well, and that's, and I think it may have been part of the list of books, because at core I'm a librarian, for resources later, I believe it's Catherine Schultz's book, Being Wrong, Adventures on the Margin of Error. And, she asked the question of, ask yourself, what does the feeling of being wrong feel like? Well, it actually feels a little like being right. I'm right that I was wrong. And there's because we don't like the doubt at one level. So there's that weird thing going on. We're going, you know what? I did screw up. I fell short of the mark. I really, there's the self-victimizing thing of going, you know what? I really am just an awful person. And there's that feeling of rightness that comes in acknowledging so-called the truth of what's going on, and which is insidious. it's completely, destructive, almost soulfully destructive, in a poetic way, but because you're taking glee or a sense of empowerment out of your own flagellation. And I mean, anybody who's been, church camps, if anybody's ever had the experience of you're there in the final day, and you've got, the bonfire going on, and it's, what, people come down to the fire and express your salvation message and what you've learned this week, and you've got this like increasing number of declarations in which one person goes, I cheated on a test, and then eventually, you've got, what, I slept with my dog, and you're like, what? Where did that come from? And it's just like, you swear at some point, like, people are just be like, yeah, I murdered 12 people. Oh yeah, well, I murdered 50. And you're going, wait a minute, what is going on here? And there's just this one-upmanship in feeling bad and portraying yourself in increasingly awful ways. And at one level, we laugh at it, and yet how often do we engage in it in a very, be it, slightly less way, or even, I mean, there's an entire comedic shtick about laughing at, Will Ferrell does it in that kind of physical comedy of, oh my God, he's just being an absolute moron, and he's hurting himself if there wasn't, stuntmen in charge here. And, there's, and we laugh at it because there is a sense in which we acknowledge the truth of our own frailties and seek joy out of it. And at that level, totally makes sense. But at another level can be, destructive.
I remember a while ago, when I was religious, we went down to Mexico and built homes for folks. And of course, there were strings attached because we did some preaching and church services and stuff. But for whatever reason, I was encouraged to fast. And so I didn't eat for like the whole week I was in Mexico, and obviously drank stuff, but I didn't eat anything. And it was like this. And then when we went back home to Los Angeles, and it was Easter Sunday, visited church, and and then of course there was this, it was Christ being crucified and dying on the cross was the service. And so there was this actor who was carrying this cross on his shoulder, staggering down the aisle, and a crown of thorns on his head. And I passed out. I completely passed out. And of course, at the time, I thought it was like, oh my God, this is a religious type of feeling of religious revelation. Years later, I'm thinking, I didn't fucking eat anything all week. Of course, I fucking passed out. But I was so excited to kind of have that experience. I put myself through some suffering, but and had this religious experience, but it was just biological. My body saying, fine, I'm just gonna give out on you.
I suddenly had this flash of people remember, I think they're still making them, but the Snickers commercials where they're like, wait, you need to find a Snickers, and it's like, some angry guy turns into I don't know, some soft-spoken grandma, and you're like, it's just like, wait, eat a Snickers, and Jesus turns into this poor schlub of an actor. You're like, oh right,
yeah, Jesus turned the loaf of breads into Snickers.
Yes, it's like if we just simply eating a candy bar, much of our traumas would go away. Yeah.
David, awesome. We're running a little behind. Where do we need to go from here? I see that there's a couple of assumptions that we make about ourselves that tie to or allow us to get into abuse or become abused in the church in some sense, or I don't think that's the right word, but I think you'd say it better than I would.
Almost truths
Well,
and untruths. Yeah.
yeah. So there's basically three untruths that we often will, one, encounter, but then two, really kind of resonate at times. And the untruths being, a single moment could define all of you. So if you lied once, you're a liar for all of eternity, kind of thing.
Oh, for fuck's sake, David, are you kidding me? Like, that has been some of the biggest regret that I've had. It's like, I was this back then, and let's say like I was a smoker, and now I quit after 2 years, and now I'm always going to be a smoker. I have to always mark that fucking box on the medical thing.
Yep, it's utterly ridiculous. And yeah, once a sinner, always a sinner. It's like, wait a minute, like, what's going on here? And we do that, of course, secularly as well. It's like, you said this bad thing 10 years ago on Twitter, that we can dismiss everything else you've done for the rest of your life. This is that moment that will define you because, whatever. And you're like, okay, how does this work again exactly? We all screw up. Where's the process of understanding the context of our humanity, and again, engaging in dialogue through a level of understanding?
It seems that being able to change our minds with new evidence or better arguments is like a really beautiful thing that us humans can do. I mean, if I have a feeling that if we couldn't change our minds, if we if we always were just one defining moment was what we were, then us as a species probably wouldn't be around anymore. We would have killed ourselves off or something
absolutely.
like that.
Well, we'd have no teeth. I mean, if we never realized that the tooth fairy is not real, and we kept getting money for enamel, being left under the pillow, what's to stop us from going, I'm gonna keep I need to pay my bills. I mean, it's just like, at some level,
pay your bills with tooth fairy money.
It doesn't actually work.
I need to buy a stick of gum.
You got far more for your teeth than I ever got. I see the point that
to a 6-year-old, quarters are huge.
Yeah.
It's just, that was a lot of money. So an untruth, a single moment will define all of who you are. That there's some kind of unchanging part of you. Whether it's a spirit or some other immutable characteristic that defines you itself. Of course, the trick there being, wait a minute, these are social constructions. They're literally, they have nothing to do with how you think your moral worth or anything of the sort. And then, of course, from then, you get the final untruth of this ideal is something that will never be reached. Certainly not by your own power. You must take on the power of either deity or political structure or group.
You are always, you are flawed without the deity to get you through. And we've chatted about this before. In our religious background, they used an illustration that we are all the products of a dented cake tin. Everything that comes out of that dented cake tin will always have that imperfection, and we are always going to have that flaw, except for God's grace to fix us or to. So that's an untruth that has really damaging consequences upon our self-esteem, upon our worth, upon our ability to move forward. How do we combat that with positive truths? How do we change that mindset?
Well, it seems that also just one single mistake ruins you for the whole life. Like, oh, I cussed once. Damn it, I'm now always going to be a cusser, and I'm now a failure. I'm a horrible person. Or I made this promise to lose weight in January, and February I haven't lost a single pound. And it almost seems like it sets us up real quick for failure. These untruths that we assume were truths at one point. I don't know, maybe I'm off.
Well, and no, absolutely. And the enticing thing about it is that there is a resonance there that goes, well, you know, I did do this and I have found myself doing it again. So doesn't that mean that it's part of who I am? And it's so easy to slip into that because, again, brains being lazy, we like the idea of a self that never changes. And so why question it? You know, how do we, and there's even some wisdom to be found in if you see somebody who has, you know, cheated on their, the last 6 relationships they've been in, then odds are it's probably a fair bet to say that if you were to get involved, they're going to cheat on you too. Now, is that 100% certain? No. But immediately you're going to go, and if it does happen, you're like, well, yeah, so I totally knew it. That's what it is. And so there's an ease of then being able to look at moments and judge the entirety of a person into their future.
Yeah.
Because we often do it on day-to-day, relationships and connections and how we're going to go moving forward.
You know, it's funny, on that note, the religious background I came from in Jehovah's Witnesses, they would say that you are not frozen in time. They would say that God does not freeze you or define you. Now that sounds great. You know, there's a scripture that says, as far off as the sunrise is from the sunset, he puts our sins. But then the mixed messaging is, but you're imperfect. You have undeserved kindness given to you from God instead of grace. So you don't actually even deserve his grace. You're getting it as a gift. So you are a sinner. You are inherently flawed. You will inherently go back to your sinful ways. Oh, but when you sin, we'll put that sin far off as the sun rises from the sunset. So the mixed messaging that it would give people, the end result was still the same. There was an injury done. That untruth caused self-worth to be lessened and our ability to think well of ourselves harmed.
Well, and of course that whole thing of, as far as the sunsets and so on, is going, well, wait a minute, if God's infinite, then he's still wherever that is anyway. So it's perfect recall at any moment. So all you're doing is really kind of gaslighting me and telling me that this is no longer an issue, but you can recall it at any moment. So wait a minute, this isn't actually as good of a gig as I was told.
I've forgiven you, but I can recall it at any moment when you slip up again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, and then, which of course then gets into the whole debate of once saved, always saved or not. I mean, it's just like, it's amazing that more believers don't have ulcers. So in order to combat or address some of these things is then getting into then 3 truths of how we recalibrate. And one of them is, complexity is the norm, not simplicity.
Yeah.
If it, and this part of this goes into that kind of a benign skepticism rather than a malignant kind, where it's a recognition that, you know what, every perspective I take is going to be a variation in truth scale and always limited. And so I can always keep looking through other lenses to keep expanding this vision, even knowing that I'll never grasp all of it. But man, if I can just move that scale like 1%, then the whole world opens up. I mean, it's an appreciation for things are just simply bigger.
Yeah. and there's nuance.
Any one vision. Yeah. And it's a good thing.
Yeah.
I mean, if things weren't bigger than any of our visions, then shoot, we'd never learn anything. We'd never grow.
Right.
And that just sucks. Like, don't sign me up for that world. I mean, talk about which goes into the whole, heaven thing where it's like everything is revealed. It's like, how boring.
This comes up so often, how we are. I remember when I was in religion, I can't talk for everybody else, but when I was in religion, I really wanted the world to be black and white, right and wrong, good and evil. And And so I would always prefer the simple answer over the more nuanced or complex answer. And it also made tribalism that much more attractive, where these people are bad. This whole group is bad, blanket bad people. So, but it's just not reality. And coming to learn that more and more, the farther and farther away I get from my own deconversion.
Yep. Well, and that gets us into, the difference between finding and looking for causes and responsibility, and which is really that second truth of as opposed to the once you've done something wrong, this defines you for the rest of your life. It's what I've taken to calling radical responsibility, where literally everything that is in your life is there for you to deal with. Not in the sense that you made it happen, not in the sense that there might still be, even structural problems, there might be things, but it's the hand that you're dealt. It's not fatalism, it's an appreciation for, when combined with that complexity piece, it's, this is what I have. Maybe I should take some time to appreciate what, frankly, luck has given me. And instead of going, owning up to, for instance, I'm just, disintelligent, or I was good at this skill or whatever. It's like, did you really, like, yeah, you worked at it, but you also had, genetics that you didn't choose, a family that you didn't choose, a social economic status that you didn't choose, a culture that you didn't choose.
Right.
And the error is found in both sides of both, one, thinking that somehow wherever you found yourself is inherently important. And at the other end, equally problematic, is to find it to be a source of condemnation. If you didn't choose it, then you can't really take pride in it, and you can't really condemn yourself over it either. Just acknowledge what is, and then seek to do with it whatever it is that you can moving forward, recognizing that this is what you have to work with. It's an analogy we used recently was, in cooking, it's like every one of us is a meal that we're making. And so
what? I've never heard that analogy. A little bit of cannibalism
there. Okay. And so, what
I mean,
and so
when I get sunburned, I eat some of those skin flakes, I'll be honest with you.
There is that whole dust thing that's like 80% skin cells, but it's weird. But there, what ingredients are you wanting to put into the mix, and how carefully are you taking care of them? In continuing to make something that you want to keep relishing and see what can develop out of it. Just don't run with the metaphor too hard.
No, that's actually a really powerful metaphor, David, because basically you're giving the control back to yourself. So we've come from religious bubbles and environments that said that we are what we are and we have no real say over it, and the divine controls us. But here you're saying we actually have the ability to create our own recipe of life, if you like, our own successful recipe. So we can control what goes into our life. We can control the outcome of it. Self-empowerment is what I'm hearing out of that. That is so different from the bubble we would have come from.
Well, and it's a self-empowerment that is still very much tied to the natural world in which we find ourselves. It's not the secret self-empowerment. There is so much more to the potential that I'm capable of than any moment allows me to see. So let me keep looking. Let me keep engaging with life, because it's only in death that things cease being able to change. And as long as you're alive, as long as you're still, kicking that rock of uncertainty and self-doubt that is an intrinsic part of us that we can continue to see, oh, that's something I didn't know I was capable of, but it was there all along.
Yeah.
And all I had to do was just keep looking and putting new pieces together to form something new.
I really love your cooking analogy, and you said it really quickly, but I think it was also impactful. Like, you get to choose the quality and the type of ingredients that go into your life. So what's kind of nice is, Sasha, next time I see you, I'm going to say, what's cooking good looking? And you'll totally get it.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate those comments, David, because you've walked us through some really valuable points, and the end result is really just genuinely giving us that real self-worth and that self-empowerment and that ability to take control over our lives. And that's really great. Thank you.
So where do we go from here? So we've kind of identified some untruths about our religious background and kind of like what it taught us, and we identified a few truths. Where do we go from here? How do we move forward?
So part of that is that, radical responsibility piece. It's really taking
Full
stock
responsibility?
of
Radical
responsibility.
Okay.
Yes. And taking stock of what's in your life to then be able to say, what can I do with it? So rather than getting caught up in,
All right,
this is what happened to me, it's, this is what I have, what can I do with it? And it's an empowerment through broadening awareness rather than empowerment through this idea that, if, I need to change and take control of, everything around me, which is frankly impossible. So, rather than, that immovable object, instead we go, what can I work on?
Yeah.
And while as well constantly asking, what else am I not seeing at the moment? Because again, every perspective is inherently limited, and that includes our own at every given moment. And so part of that process then is building on a shared humanity. It's deliberately engaging with alternative opinions, not for the purpose of dismantling them necessarily, not for the purpose of saying, that's not who I am, thank you, or that's just inherently silly. Instead, it's, so if I could articulate that opinion, even if I still disagree with it, if I could articulate it in the best way possible, can I do so in a way that I almost feel like, wow, that makes a lot of sense. I can see some truth there. I can see what they were trying to address in this philosophy. And while I don't agree with where they went and where they ended up, I can appreciate what they were trying to solve, because I too am trying to address those same needs. And that's the same thing with, anytime we're encountering, had a recent, conversation about, for instance, an understanding ideas that you otherwise disagree with, and then using the best examples. It's like, if I want to have a debate about Christianity, I'm not going to go and keep screaming about Westboro Baptist Church. I mean, that's low-hanging fruit,
right,
that is just unhelpful. Because, I mean, in certain company, we might be able to go, yeah, these are just awful people. But frankly, a lot of believers believe the same thing. They don't agree with them either. So you're not really getting to the heart of the best version of the idea that you still may disagree with. Any more than, I think it was, I don't know if many people here might be old enough to remember Kirk Cameron's banana video in describing the Trinity of God. An absolutely absurd video, but I'm not gonna, laugh still at it. but I'm not going to go to it and
It's
use
Ray
it
Comfort.
Ray
as
Comfort's
a
one
way
of the two.
to disagree. Yeah, I'm not going to, this is what you think. Well, not really.
Yeah.
You know, so it's truly wrestling with, you know, the best of the alternatives, so that it's that iron sharpening iron idea. You know, I think Dawkins or somebody else, instead of straw manning, it's steel manning, where you understand and can articulate your opposition so well that they go, wow, you agree with me. And you go, no, not really. But you know, thanks for thanks for letting me know that I truly nailed the best way possible what you stand for.
It feels like what you're describing would lead to compassion with having some understanding, and then also a little bit of charity too. Instead of picking the low-hanging fruit, you kind of work off of understanding the best arguments and giving them the benefit of the doubt for the most part, I think.
Yep. Well,
Okay.
and that undermines some of those processes we talked about earlier about how fundamentalism works, because fundamentalism states that there is a point at which dialogue is impossible because you just have to take that leap. And what a thorough exploration of alternative opinions and different ways of looking at things will do is push back on that and go, no, it's actually dialogue in total, dialogue to the most uncomfortable degree that allows us to keep exploring, you know, this, you know, experience that we're having. And so, no, there is no point at which we have to stop. In fact, we have to keep going, even when we're uncertain, even when we feel uncomfortable, even when it's an idea that I otherwise, you know, I might vehemently disagree with, because to do so is to acknowledge, oh, now I have a better understanding of what I want to do with myself. You know, it's, you know, encountering truly bad ideas in the best way articulated can be an incredibly freeing moment, because then you can really start taking a look at it and go, wow, I actually had a little bit here in my own thinking that almost got me there. And now I can see it and collapse that future into a present that is increasingly better instead of stagnant.
Got it. Very cool.
Well, that's been very helpful. Yeah, you've really tried to help us to be able to just bounce forward. You know, I love this idea of moving forward from one way of thinking, moving forward with our own self-esteem, our focus on the future, getting out of those bubbles. There's been some really helpful stuff there, David. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Before we move on to the Q&A, is there anything else that you need to say that we haven't covered yet, or you want to cover?
I think just one, you know, a final point concerning compassion, because it's been brought up, you know, a few times. And compassion, at least for me, is, I think, the closest we can get to a humanistic version of grace. You know, it's that recognition that we all are flawed, not in some kind of intrinsic, like, there's just something fundamentally wrong with you, but in the sense that we all see things in degrees of accuracy, and that's okay. That's perfectly fine. And so compassion allows us to celebrate that shared humanity and going, wow, I didn't do that great. And let's laugh about it and work together to, you know, raise the bar. You know, I had a therapist of my own actually once who put it as, we're in this kind of upward spiral where we might go over old ground again, but it'll be at a new level. And the more we work at it, the higher we're going to get, and the more removed we will become from the original problem. And yeah, we might still go, yeah, that's still hanging around.
Mm.
But man, I'm agreeing with this. I'm dealing with this a whole lot better than I did before. And that is really, that's success. That's awesome. Like that's really what we want. We can't solve everything, but man, if I can move that meter again just a little bit, and the sky opens up.
Yeah. Now, this is more, it sounds to be more about how we view our own thinking in some sense and how we kind of grow ourselves. But there's also these very extreme situations that may occur where like having been abused, like we don't necessarily need to give the abuser the green light, like, hey, it's okay that you did this to me or anything like that. How do we kind of reconcile between wanting to grow and move on, but also not necessarily letting the people get away with the shit that they did?
No, and I'm noting that, and I really unequivocally very much state this is not about giving passes to awful behavior. This is not at all about going, well, you know, they were trying. No, behavior is still awful. Being treated badly is still being treated badly. That we're not calling for a kind of martyrdom to our humanity kind of thing. There is still right and wrong and so on. What we're looking at here is to, you know, see even those people who have abused us as themselves being human as well. And yes, we may not want anything more to do with them for good reason, for good, you know, self-care reasons, because again, it's difficult to change. And so we don't want to keep putting ourselves in the path of a train thinking that it's going to stop on a dime. But in order to understand better, to distance our own self, you know, much of what happens in abuse is that we start taking on the qualities, the kind of the story that the abuser, whether or not it's a person or an institution, has about us. And so by understanding it better, we then start being able to go, that's not a story that I need to hold. You know, it comes back to the previous, one of the polling questions of who's still feeling like they're being judged by an ethical system they no longer hold. Well, why is that? Because it was seeking to address a problem, you know, that we also are seeking to address. It just was done in an awful way. But if we can acknowledge that it was at least an attempt, that we can go, oh, that's why it still is around me. That's why it's still here in my head. Because, right, this person wasn't, you know, some kind of devil, even though they certainly did a whole lot of awful things. It's, they too were also, engaged in this process, and they just really went about it in an awful way for any number of reasons. And here we are.
Well, David, thank you so much for spending this time with us this evening. We're going to go ahead and move on to the Q&A section. Folks, if you have any questions for David, go ahead and type them into the chat, both here in Zoom or at the ACD that's getting monitored as well.
I'll also put a link in the chat to the resources list that David's provided. It's a whole lot of books by some very, very good people. I'll put that in the chat as well if anyone would like to check out that catalogue of material.
One of the first questions that we had is, where do you think purity testing came from? Is it a tribalist type of thing? And do you have any kind of reading recommendations about maybe where purity testing comes from?
So, so it'd come back to Schultz's being wrong. It would look at what's the, I forget the guy, the author, but community, where it's an exploration of how groups form. Frankly, Hannah Arendt in her Origins of Totalitarianism, if you want to go old school, there are some deep truths there. And, you know, the idea of purity testing is really about keeping the group whole. And for good reason. I mean, if you're initially, you know, because if you're standing for something, you don't want it watered down. You don't want it undermined by people who are antithetical to it. And so there is a point at which if you really need to say the things that, and state your belief in the things that this group does in order for us to have this kind of cohesive movement going forward to address the issues that we're wanting to address. And if you have a fundamental disagreement, well, then find another group, you know, kind of thing.
Okay.
At the same time, where it goes awry is where the lack of questioning is, you know, it becomes essentially your own echo chamber. And you can here's the thing, you can be right, of course, right being always in a matter of degree, and still be in an echo chamber. That will eventually, you know, encourage a continued drilling down to a finer and finer point, because any disagreement increasingly becomes problematic rather than just the major ones. If that's if the principle is you have to be utterly for me, then eventually this is going to be further and further isolating.
Got it. I don't really see any other questions. Sasha, do you see any other questions?
No. If anyone has anything else, feel free to drop it in the chat. Last opportunity.
Oh, here we go.
Oh, yep.
Let's see
So
here.
I did see a question. I won't say the name. I'm learning.
Thank you. Making my job easier.
That had to do with giving an example of a problem abuser was trying to solve, that we have the same problem. And so one, in part of it is, say, for instance, a feeling of power, control, the feeling of saying that what I do matters. Fundamentally, that's what all of us are interested in order to see that what I do has an effect at its base level. Like that's what we're interested in. What the person who is engaging in abuse has done is taken that tendency, that proclivity, that way of you know, interacting, and tied it to behavior that is utterly destructive. And ultimately, and here's the irony, awful as it is that ultimately it ends up undermining the very thing that they were seeking to deal with. Because the more you abuse, the more isolated you become, which means that you have less and less of an effect. And so it ends up being completely self-destructive. And it made even worse by the fact of what you've done to others. And so, but at the core, they're still wanting to say, hey, what I did mattered. It was just highly malignant. And yeah, getting away from it is definitely a good thing. So I hope that addressed that.
And that kind of goes into our next question. Is forgiveness for abuse or towards an abuser, do you feel that's a key step in the acknowledgement of having been abused?
So part of this depends a little bit on how you define forgiveness. So forgiveness, in the way that I look at it, is that it's about you,
Right.
not the other person. This
Okay.
addresses a little bit of, we're not making excuses for awful behavior. We're not giving people passes. Forgiveness has to do with a felt sense of going, you know what, for a period of time, there was a resonance with how you treated me, or how this idea portrayed me, and that I fell into. And the forgiveness is about, I don't want that anymore. That is not the mantle, the label, the story that defines who I am. And so it's a recognition that I am more than what you as an individual or an institution or an ideology told me I was.
So is that,
So forgiveness is as much a declaration of one's humanity in an ever enlarging way than it ever is about what you did was okay, or no, because it never was, or that I somehow moved on from it and it'll never affect me ever again. Because it's just not, there will always be some semblance, some shred. It's one of those things where people will struggle with things and they'll move past it in a one way, and then years, maybe months, years down the road, all of a sudden, something comes up and they're like, oh, I haven't done this in so long.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's not that you failed. It's not that you didn't make any progress. It's just that our brains don't get rid of things. So once a connection has been made, it never fully goes away. It may get buried over better and better connections as time goes on. And so it may take a lot for it to rise up again, but it's still there. And so when it comes up, it's not a problem with you. It's just a recognition of, hey, okay, so again, this is not me. That's not the story that I'm living.
I guess it's a way of reframing the power dynamic, isn't it? The whole change the situation from victim to survivor, reframing the situation that happened, and whether it's a trigger to us anymore or whether we are in control of that moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We can't control what life gives us in a certain sense of that. We can address to a certain degree what we're going to do with it, any more than we can't control the thoughts that just pop up coming. They're literally just there, but we can then work at deciding how much weight we want to give to them.
There was another very good question that was posed as well. And of course, we're talking about the abusive relationships that religion has over. How can we safeguard against those who might try and draw us back into dogma or religion?
Well, one is frankly a humility in noting that I don't want to say desire, but that tendency is still alive and well, because we're human. So at any time that we ever go, I will never fall victim to that again, it's probably the time that you probably should go and wait, where is it already present that I'm not seeing? And so, it's an acknowledgement of that tendency, so that we are, it's the forewarned is forearmed kind of thing. We're aware of our proclivity and therefore go, okay, so when was the last time, for instance, that I took a serious, look into the things that I assume are true? Well, when was the last time that I engaged in a contrary opinion, or a challenging book or article or podcast or TV show for that matter? It's like, when was the last time I was challenged?
Yeah, that's something that I remember I felt when I first lost my faith and came out of it, I felt so scared and vulnerable, totally vulnerable, because I no longer believed, but I really didn't know why, and I didn't know what the arguments for an alternative were, or like the why there would be an alternative. And so it took a lot of just reading and researching and kind of understanding the arguments on both sides. Like, oh, this is pretty flimsy, but oh, this is pretty good, pretty convincing. Having that knowledge really kind of helped me be able to hear what people were saying and see what people were trying to do in some coercive ways. But I don't know, that kind of helped
No,
me
that's a very good
That was
point,
beautiful.
Eric.
Yeah.
So there was another very good question too that was posed. How can we help someone who's in an abusive situation, whether it's familial or religious, when they're in that abusive situation and they don't see it? How do we help a person like that? Or is it even our place to help them?
Yeah, there's two different questions there.
Yeah, let's stick to the first one. Sorry. How do we help them because they're in a vulnerable situation?
Yeah. So I'm reminded of, in any of us who went through a deconversion process, and or it doesn't even have to be that big. Anybody who's found out or come to a realization that something that they believed is just, wait, this isn't exactly in whole or in part true. Okay. And if you pause for a moment and go, what was the final nail in that recognition? And we can look back at the sometimes most eloquent of arguments that were presented to us, and we went, nah, that's not true. And then later on, we encounter something utterly ridiculous, and I go, wow, no, that totally just nailed me. That I get it. For those of us when we were in religion and trying to save people, and we'd just be on fire with the best presentation possible, and the person looked at us and go, nah. And then later on we went, so back to that river splitting the three, and they're like, oh, you're right, it's absolutely true. And you're like, wait, what just happened here? And all of that to say is that the quality of the argument is great, but it has far more to do quite often with your own journey than it has to do with the other person. And so when dealing with somebody, wanting to help somebody in an abusive situation of that kind of structural way, it's to basically just be with them. Getting into arguments is to put the power of the word be above that of the power of our shared humanity. And at just the basic level, it's just to go, you know what? You're trying to make sense of your world, and I really don't agree with how you're going about doing it. Man, I can see the terrible things that it's doing to you, but you're trying. You're in a limited way, and I remember that when I was in that spot, and there was no way I would have listened to anybody either. But man, it would have been really nice for somebody just to go, wow, I care. That's more than a bumper sticker. It really is just an appreciation for, man, we're just in this together, and we may not even be on the same ship, and maybe your oars got left behind back there, but I'm ready to give you mine as soon as you're willing to step up and say, hey, what about this? But yeah.
David, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate your time here. Love the topic, and I hope that you'll come back and share some more of your wisdom with us. That is going to conclude the main portion of our show, folks, but we've got another one coming up next week. Sasha, would you mind telling us what's going on next week?
Thank you. Yes, our own Dr. Darryl Ray, the founder of Recovering from Religion, is going to give a really great discourse to us, a really great chat called The Science of Sex. Now, this is interesting because religions teach nothing about actual sexuality, biology, why our bodies work the way they do. So Dr. Ray will talk about some basic facts about sex, evolution, human sexuality. This is the bio, like, why is the penis shaped as it is? What is it with the sperm that males produce? What is sexual dimorphism? Are we chimps, gorillas, or bonobos? We breed cows, chickens, and other animals. Could we be breeding ourselves as well? Few interesting questions there. Learning the science of sex can help us make our own decisions about our sexuality and help us to throw away 3,000-year-old ideas that religious indoctrination has saddled us with. So yeah, please feel free to join us next week. That's going to be a fantastic chat. And if we've heard lots of talks that Dr. Darrell has shared before, we know that these chats are really helpful and they're fun and they're informative.
If I think I might have seen him do this talk before, and if I remember what it is, there is going to be a lot of pictures of animal genitalia. It's going to be quite interesting and pretty fun. So anyways, I'm looking forward to it. It was a hoot. Folks, if you have any questions or comments or inquiries for us here at RfRx, please send us an email at rfrx@recoveringfromreligion.org. And like we said at the beginning, all of our previous shows, every goddamn one of them are on YouTube channel, recoveringfromreligion.com. Nope. It's the other way around. youtube.com/recoveringfromreligion.
The one, yep.
I'll get it one of these
days. Feel free to share all of those. So at this stage, we've got all of the videos up there. Feel free to share them to your socials. If there's a specific topic or a specific therapist or guest that's been on the show, feel free to share those links.
Exactly. Yeah. And we have, like we said at the beginning, a podcast, and we've got a blog, some fantastic content on those things as well. Now, we always love for folks who can come and volunteer. We always love for folks who can donate, because this is all run by volunteers, completely nonprofit. But if you're not able to do it, one of the things that really helps us out a lot is if you can interact with our social media. We're all over the social media world. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and even TikTok, for crying out loud. So interact, like, share, blah, blah, blah. All that social media stuff really, really helps. We also have a newsletter. A while ago, in the exit polls, the feedback poll, we asked if folks would be interested in newsletter, and there was like an overwhelming response, like, yes, let's have a newsletter. And it's going to contain things like the resources from this discussion, recent videos that have been published, recent blog entries that have been published, all sorts of great news on RfR. So you're more than welcome to join and sign up for the newsletter if that's your sort of thing. And I'm going to drop a link to that as well. Now, with one final thing, we've got that exit poll. We'd love to get your feedback. And while that poll is going, I'd like to bring on, like I said at the beginning, I teased at the very beginning, the incredibly brilliant Executive Director of Recovering from Religion, Gayle Jordan. Gayle, how are you doing this evening?
I'm fine. Thank you for that lovely introduction, as usual, every week. Thank you, Eric. David, thank you for such a good presentation. You know, those of us who volunteer for Recovering from Religion, we're from all over the spectrum, and we're at different points in our journey. But the farther, I think one of you said it, Sasha or Eric, somebody said it, the farther we get away from it, the more it's just the nature of memory. You begin to dissociate all those things that were part of it. And having a talk like this helps us remember and be kinder and more compassionate to the folks that are just starting. You know, we may have heard all of the reasons 1,000 times, but they're just beginning. They're just at the first part of their journey, and you bringing it back to us and understanding the power of the whole atmosphere and the power of all the pieces that are working against a person trying to break away, the loss of community and the psychological damage and all of the things. It's helpful to be reminded of that. So speaking of volunteering for Recovering from Religion, we'd love to have you join our family. It really is a lot of fun. It's a way to pay it forward, so to speak, if you are like me and you spent some time in those Sunday school classes talking about things and acting as if you knew things that you didn't know, it feels good to volunteer and to unwind a little bit of that. If you've got some time and you'd like to join our volunteer team, we'd love to have you. Also, we have, we're a nonprofit. If you want to be a partner in donating, that's another way to do this too. Eric mentioned our support groups. Those support groups are the information for those support groups are hosted on Meetup, and those cost, every single one of them cost on a monthly basis. We'd love to have your financial support. If that's the way you'd like to partner with us, we'd love that too. The last thing I want to mention is that we do have the fall excursion coming up in September. This is a weekend religion recovery retreat. We did it in 2019. We had to let it go in 2020, and now we're back. And it's the most glorious weekend. It's so much fun. It's laughter and music and meditation and hikes and all of the things that a weekend in the mountains of North Carolina would be, only none of the religious stuff, none of the guilt, and none of the manipulation, and none of the overwhelming sense that you've got to confess something or you have to conform in some way. It was the most freeing weekend. It was just glorious. If you'd like to come, we'd love to have you. We have some subsidies available. We have partners who are willing to fund your attending the excursion. So don't let finances keep you back. If you can possibly make it in September in the cool mountains of North Carolina, we'd love to have you join us. I hope you can stay for the hangout. That's where some of the best times are had of the whole evening. David, thank you again for a wonderful presentation. Thank you to our hosts, Sasha and Eric, and thank you to our Troll Smashers who had a little bit of work to do tonight, but not a lot. And thank you to everyone else for attending.